The air was thick with fog, so dense it felt like a heavy blanket draped over the world. Each breath was a struggle, as if the mist was trying to seep into his lungs. An eerie red glow pulsed from behind the clouds, casting an ominous light over everything. The moon, blood-red and foreboding, seemed to watch over the night with a sinister gaze. It was a night for staying in, for curling up with a book or a movie, safe from the unsettling atmosphere outside. The kind of night where the world outside your window felt like a different, more dangerous place. But Tony had pizzas to deliver. No matter how eerie the night, people still wanted their food, and Tony had a job to do. He shivered, the cold seeping into his bones. The fog seemed to cling to him, making every step feel like a struggle. The hairs on his arm were standing straight up, a primal reaction to the fear that was slowly creeping over him. He tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered. Tony checked the address again. 1313 Cemetery Lane. He gulped, the name alone sending a chill down his spine. It sounded like something out of a horror movie. This was not a good sign. The address seemed to mock him, daring him to proceed. But he had no choice. He had to deliver the pizzas. He approached the house, each step echoing in the silence. The mansion loomed before him, its dark windows like eyes watching his every move. It was a crumbling Victorian mansion, its once grand facade now a shadow of its former self. The walls were cracked, and the paint was peeling, giving it an air of neglect and decay. Cobwebs decorated the porch like Halloween streamers, swaying gently in the breeze. He rang the bell, the sound echoing through the empty night. It made a deep, mournful gong. Silence, the kind of silence that felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. Tony waited, then rang again. His heart pounded louder with each passing second, the silence around him growing more oppressive. Suddenly, the door creaked open, but no one was there. The darkness inside seemed to beckon him, a void that threatened to swallow him whole.
Hello? His voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. He hoped someone would answer, but the silence was his only reply.
Tony called out, his voice trembling. He peered inside, trying to see through the darkness. The shadows seemed to move, playing tricks on his eyes. The house was dark and silent, the kind of silence that felt alive, as if the house itself was watching him. He could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on him. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears, each beat a reminder of his fear. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the fear was relentless. The next delivery was to Spook Hill, a place with a creepy reputation. Tony had heard the stories, the whispers of strange occurrences and eerie sightings. It was a place that locals avoided after dark, a place where the air seemed thicker and the shadows seemed to move on their own. The houses were old and shrouded in mist, their windows like dark, empty eyes watching his every move. The fog clung to the ground, swirling around his car as he drove deeper into the neighborhood. Tony gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking his every move. He found the house at the end of a gravel road. It stood alone, isolated from the other houses, as if it had been abandoned by the world. It was small and dilapidated, with peeling paint and broken windows. The roof sagged, and the porch looked like it could collapse at any moment. An unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. It was as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Tony cautiously approached the porch, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He rang the doorbell, the sound loud and jarring in the quiet night. He waited, his breath coming in short, nervous gasps. A high-pitched giggle made him jump. It was a sound that didn't belong, a sound that sent a chill down his spine. A little girl dressed in a white gown opened the door. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, her expression unreadable.
Pizza's here, Tony said, his voice trembling slightly. He forced a smile, hoping to mask his unease.
Tony said, forcing a smile. The girl didn't smile back. She just stared at him, her eyes dark and empty. The girl didn't smile back. Her face remained expressionless, her eyes fixed on Tony.
"Mummy says you have to come in," she said, her voice a whisper. Tony hesitated.
She said, her voice a whisper. Tony hesitated. He had a bad feeling about this. Every instinct told him to turn around and leave, but he couldn't. He had a job to do. He had a bad feeling about this. The air seemed to grow colder, and the shadows around him seemed to deepen. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind him. The last delivery was on Devil's Lane, a road notorious for strange occurrences. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting grotesque shadows. Tony's heart raced with each turn. He finally found the address, a ramshackle cabin hidden amongst the trees. An oppressive silence hung in the air, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Tony took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. He knocked on the door. It swung open with a groan, revealing a dark and dusty interior.
Hello?
Tony called out, his voice echoing through the empty space. A pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness. Tony froze, his blood turning to ice. A low growl sent shivers down his spine. Tony stumbled back, dropping the pizza. He fumbled for his car keys, his hands shaking. The red eyes advanced, their malevolent gaze piercing through him. He threw open the car door and scrambled inside. As he fumbled with the ignition, the creature let out a deafening roar. Tony slammed his foot on the gas and sped away, the creature's enraged screams echoing in his ears. He didn't stop until he reached the relative safety of the main road. Gasping for breath, he looked back at the dark and winding path he'd just escaped. He had never been so terrified in his life. Back on Spook Hill, the little girl in the white gown led Tony inside. The house was dark and dusty, filled with cobwebs and the musty smell of decay.
"Mummy's in here," the girl whispered, leading him down a narrow hallway.
They reached a room at the end of the hall. The girl pushed open the door, revealing a candlelit room. A woman sat at a table, her back turned to them.
"Mommy, the pizza man is here," the girl said.
The woman slowly turned around. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and lifeless. Tony gasped. She was the spitting image of the little girl, except older, much older. "Thank you for coming," the woman said, her voice a dry rasp. "My daughter gets hungry at night. It's been so long since we've had a visitor." She gestured to the pizza. "Won't you join us?" Tony's heart pounded in his chest. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He looked from the woman to the little girl, his mind racing. They were identical, but how was that possible?
The little girl giggled again, a high-pitched, chilling sound. "Don't be scared," she said. "We just want to play." She picked up a rusty knife from the table, her innocent face taking on a sinister cast.
At 1313 Cemetery Lane, Tony hesitantly stepped inside the mansion. The air was heavy and cold, filled with the scent of decay. He called out again, his voice echoing through the empty halls.
Hello, is anyone home?
A cold wind suddenly slammed the door shut behind him. Tony jumped, his heart racing. He tried the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. He was trapped. A blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. Tony spun around, his blood turning to ice. A ghostly figure, draped in tattered white, floated down the grand staircase. Its eyes glowed with an eerie green light. Tony never forgot the horrors he witnessed that night. The blood moon, the creepy girl, the glowing eyes, they were forever burned into his memory. It was a night unlike any other, where the air was thick with an unexplainable dread. The moon hung low, casting an eerie red glow over everything, making the shadows dance in sinister ways. Tony could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching him, following his every move. He quit his job the next day, unable to bear another delivery. The fear had seeped into his bones, making every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the leaves a potential threat. His once mundane job had turned into a nightly terror, and he knew he couldn't continue. The memory of that night haunted him, a constant reminder of the unknown horrors that lurked in the darkness. Some say the mansion on Cemetery Lane is haunted by the spirits of those who died within its walls. The old, decrepit building stood as a monument to the past, its windows like empty eyes staring out into the night. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the eerie sounds that emanated from within, the whispers of the long dead echoing through the halls. It was a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, and Tony had no desire to ever go near it again. Others whisper about a ghostly girl on Spook Hill who lures unsuspecting visitors to their doom. The legend spoke of a young girl, her face pale and eyes hollow, who would appear in the mist, beckoning travellers to follow her. Those who did were never seen again, their fates sealed by the malevolent spirit. Tony had heard the stories, but he never believed them until that fateful night. Now he knew better than to dismiss the tales of the supernatural. And then there are the tales of Devil's Lane, a place where evil lurks in the shadows. The narrow, winding alley was a place of darkness, where the light of the moon barely penetrated. It was said that those who ventured down Devil's Lane at night would encounter unspeakable horrors, their minds twisted by the malevolent forces that resided there. Tony had never been down that path, but he had no doubt that the stories were true. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is for sure. Tony's pizza deliveries became the stuff of local legend, a chilling reminder that some things are best left undisturbed. The townspeople would often recount the tale of the night Tony encountered the supernatural, their voices filled with a mix of fear and fascination. It was a story that would be passed down through generations, a warning to all who dared to venture into the unknown. Tony's experience served as a stark reminder that the world is full of mysteries, and some are better left unexplored. The horror remains, a lingering presence that continues to haunt the town and its people. The blood moon, the creepy girl, the glowing eyes. They are all part of a dark tapestry that weaves through the fabric of the town's history. And as long as the stories are told, the horror will never truly be forgotten.